Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sackur. When my guest today, Gedion Timothewos, joined the new Ethiopian government led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in 2018, there was much optimistic talk of a country embracing new freedoms and a new sense of unity. So much for those high hopes. Mr. Timothewos has since been promoted to Attorney General, but the political climate in Ethiopia has deteriorated dramatically. Right now, the country's federal armed forces are mounting what they call the final phase of their military assault on rebels in the northern Tigray region. Already, many hundreds have been killed in 3 weeks of fighting, and hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced. 40,000 are currently sheltering in Sudan. International observers have expressed concern about possible war crimes, a looming humanitarian disaster, and the danger of wider regional instability. All of this has happened just a year after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Why have things gone so wrong so fast in Ethiopia? Well, Gedion Timothewos joins me now from Addis Ababa. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Are we about to see a humanitarian catastrophe as a result of your Prime Minister's decision to launch a final offensive on the Tigrayan regional capital of Mekelle?
We have to understand that this crisis is something that has been forced upon this administration and the Prime Minister. It was not by choice. Our forces in the Northern Command, based in the Tigray regional state, were attacked. It was a perfidious and treasonous attack. The objective of the TPLF top brass was to take over the armaments of the Northern Command and to overthrow this government. So the Prime Minister and this administration were left with no option but to respond with force. And this administration is taking every precaution possible to ensure that civilians will be protected and to ensure that the humanitarian challenge will be kept to the minimum.
Well, let me stop you there, because that isn't clear to me. I'm going to quote to you something said by a spokesman for the Ethiopian Armed Forces just 4 days ago. He said there would, quote, be no mercy for Mekelle's residents when its soldiers encircle the city.
First of all, that quote was of a colonel in the army, in the field. He was not a spokesperson, as some have said, of the army or even the administration.
But with respect, it's even more alarming. If a senior officer is saying that, it's even more alarming. These are the men who are now marching on Mekelle.
It is the commander-in-chief of the army and the army's spokesperson who communicate and convey the administration's policy. And the colonel, even in that clip, was referring to the TPLF militia. He was calling on them to surrender. And as far as as far as civilians are concerned, the administration and the colonel himself in that clip were calling upon civilians to disarm, to stay clear from obvious military targets like military installations.
Well, you're the Attorney General in your government. You must be concerned when, for example, Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, expresses deep alarm at the reports of the heavy buildup of Ethiopian military equipment around Mekelle. She says the aggressive rhetoric on both sides, it should be said, is dangerously provocative. And she said talk such as that about no mercy could actually constitute a war crime if it is then carried out. You're the Attorney General. What are you going to do about it?
I must point out that equating the government and the TPLF top brass is wrong, both morally and legally. The federal administration is the lawful authority to administer the country. It has every right to deploy forces in Tigray and enforce law and order, while on the other hand, the regional administration, the TPLF, does not have the right to raise an army and attack the Northern Command. The attack perpetrated against the Northern Command and the previous provocations of the TPLF left the government no option but to use force to impose law and order. I must also point out that the government has been at pains to avoid this kind of scenario. For more than 2 years, we have been urging and pleading with the TPLF leadership to resolve differences in a peaceful manner. Elders from all phases, as well as traditional leaders, went all the way to Mekelle to urge the TPLF to come to the table, but these overtures were rebuffed. They are ridiculed.
But Mr. Attorney General, it strikes me that you do have choices in your government, and you also have to look at the situation as it stands today. We know that many hundreds of people have died as a result of the 3 weeks or so of fighting. We know that hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced, including more than 40,000 who've been forced to flee into neighbouring countries. This is already a humanitarian crisis, so your choice is simple. Do you push ahead with the military offensive and cause a much greater catastrophe, or do you pause and look for some sort of negotiated solution? Are you prepared to countenance the latter?
If an attack was committed against an army base in any federal country, and if a regional state or a regional party tries to take over the heavy armament and the artillery and the weaponry of the army in any country, the response couldn't be different. You would not sit with a political party that votes to launch rockets at heavily populated cities and threatens civilian population, threatens the national government. The national army has been attacked, a red line has been crossed, and we have to enforce law and order. If we were to sit at the negotiating table with this kind of renegade elements, that will send the wrong signal, and every political party would get the idea that if they were to commit this kind of acts, they would get a seat at the table, they would get an international platform. We would be incentivizing violence and perpetuating a culture of impunity, and we're not willing to do
this
that.
is more than anything else right now. It is thus the most urgent of humanitarian issues. The UN says that shortages have become, quote, very critical in Tigray for the population of 6 million people. They talk about fuel running out, cash running out. People have no money to pay for food. And already 600,000 people who rely on monthly food rations have not received them for the last month. How many people are you prepared to see pushed toward starvation? And indeed, how many people are you prepared to see die before you rethink the military-first strategy?
The National Emergency Preparedness and Response Commission has finalized its needs assessment. A technical team was sent to the field to conduct an assessment, and based on that assessment, humanitarian access routes are being facilitated. 4 camps and sites are already being set up. So the relevant ministry and government agencies have already started their work to ensure that the appropriate humanitarian relief and aid will reach those who are in need. I must also point out that at this point in time, we have reached the final phase of the operation. Most of the Tigray regional state is under the control of the federal government, so we can provide humanitarian relief unhindered. The last phase of the operation relates to only one city, and most of the territory of the regional state of Tigray will be accessible for humanitarian purposes.
The UN Commissioner for Human Rights says reports continue to emerge of arbitrary arrests and detentions, killings, as well as discrimination and stigmatization of ethnic Tigrayans. Would you accept, Mr. Attorney General, there is an ethnic element to this conflict and the way it is being prosecuted on the ground?
You have to understand that the TPLF is an ethnic party. From its genesis, the way it's organized, it's an ethnic party, its leaders, its membership, it's all from the same ethnic group. That's in the nature of the party. So most of its operatives, most of its supporters, and virtually all of its members are from the same ethnic party. So when that party engages in criminal activity, when it operates like a criminal enterprise, Unfortunately, the law enforcement response might have an ethnic element to it as well, but that is not from the design or intention of the federal government, but that is the very nature of the political organization itself.
Well, when you say that the government's response might have an ethnic element to it as well, I think many people around the world are going to be worried about that. Let me quote to you a recent tweet from Jake Sullivan, who is to be Joe Biden's national security advisor. He says, "I'm deeply concerned about the risk of violence against civilians in and around Mekelle, including potential war crimes." And the EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has talked about his great concern of ethnic targeted violence. He says that he sees the possibility of huge violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. The international community fears war crimes on a massive scale.
We understand the concern of the international community. The administration has repeatedly issued statements and given instructions to ensure that civilians are protected and also to ensure that there will not be arbitrary and discriminatory conduct on the part of law enforcement agencies. As I have pointed out earlier, the TPLF is an organization that is organized along ethnic lines, so it might give an appearance that measures taken against this group have certain slant, but that is not what the government is doing. I must also point out that the government is taking extreme caution and care to ensure that civilians will be protected and they will not come in harm's way. For example, although the army had reached Mekelle a few days ago, the government gave a 3-day grace period to ensure that civilians will have some time to evacuate and will be able to minimize humanitarian disasters, to ensure that we'll be able to minimize damage to civilians.
The Tigrayans say that this is actually part of a much bigger story in which we see Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed backing away from his opening sort of few months in power when he talked about unifying the country, coming together, a new era of freedom. And according to the Tigrayans, what they have seen is a systematic oppression of their political rights, their right to autonomy and to self-government. They say that their elections in September were declared illegal by the central government. They say that that top officers in the federal army, in the Northern Command, were purged simply because they were Tigrayan. What they say is that there's a pattern here, that the Abiy Ahmed government is no longer prepared to countenance their autonomy.
You have to distinguish between Tigrayans and the TPLF. They are not one and the same. That is the problem in the way you are constructing the question. The TPLF is one organization. The government's problem is not even with the entirety of the TPLF. It's not with the rank and file member of the TPLF. It is with the oligarchic element within the TPLF who have chosen to resort to violence to advance their political objective. And as far as what the TPLF stand is in relation to the reforms are concerned, from day one, the TPLF has been trying to derail the reform of this administration. They have opposed the Prime Minister from day one. They have been carrying out various provocations. They have been inciting and instigating violence, ethnic clashes in various parts of the country. So this is our problem with the TPLF. The TPLF wants to regain the power it lost. The TPLF wants to regain the economic and political dominance it had, the undue privilege it had, and we are saying that can't happen.
But, Mr. Attorney General, I might find that argument more convincing were it not for the fact that the discontent of the Tigrayans, you say the TPLF, but many Tigrayans, is matched by discontent in other parts of your country. There are many different groups in your country who look at what Abiy Ahmed is doing today and say that he is no longer bringing the country together. He is governing in a way which is repressing and oppressing different ethnic groupings inside Ethiopia.
Mr. Sackur, if you look at the reality on the ground, dissidents, political parties that have been in exile, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, the Oromo Liberation Front, all sorts of political parties have returned to Ethiopia. We have a more vibrant political landscape now than ever before. We are enjoying more pluralism. We are embracing diversity, and we're seeing the reforms bear fruit.
But if you told me, sorry to interrupt, but if you told me all of that 6 months after Abiy Ahmed came to power, that might have been persuasive. But look at the reality today. You have many people in the Oromia region who are disgusted with what they see as the repressive tactics of the federal government. We have a recent Amnesty International report which looks back at the last year in Oromia and finds that the security forces have carried out, quote, extrajudicial executions, arbitrary arrest and detention, torture and other forms of ill treatment, forced evictions. I could go on. You are the Attorney General. You were appointed to stand up for the rule of law, and you are letting so many of your fellow countrymen down.
We have conducted our own investigation about the Amnesty report that you are referring to. We have pointed out to the flaws and problems in that report, and this office, not only this office, but this administration has taken issues of human rights very seriously. We have been trying to bring to account those who have committed systematic and gross human rights violations. That is one of the reasons why we find ourselves at odds with the TPLF. The TPLF was not willing to honor warrants issued against the former spy chief who was responsible for this kind of gross human rights violation. They want to ensure impunity for these kind of individuals. So I think it is a bit difficult to accept these kind of accusations when they come from that corner.
But I am mindful that you are trained in constitutional law. You were put into this office to be a beacon of hope for Ethiopians that things were going to be different. And now look at the conclusions of experts on Ethiopian politics like Kjetil Tronvoll, who's in Norway, but nonetheless is an expert on Ethiopia at his Peace and Conflict Studies Center. He says, it seems to me, hang on, let me finish. It seems to me, he says, the political transition that Abiy Ahmed promised has stalled. The government is relapsing into authoritarian practices.
I beg to differ with his assessment of the situation. If you ask most Ethiopians, it's clear to us who's trying to derail the reforms, who's trying to turn the country into an ungovernable space. TPLF wants to return to power. Towards that, they are trying to bring about the disintegration of the country. Getachew Reda, one of the spokespersons of the TPLF, openly said that the relationship that the TPLF wants to have with the center is very much akin to the relationship between Somaliland and Mogadishu. And for that to happen, they have to turn Ethiopia into a situation very much like Somalia. They have to turn Ethiopia into a stateless society.
You know what, if I may say so, Mr. Attorney General, you know what your critics are saying about you? They say that you were appointed as an independent technocrat and you have become, in the course of your 2 years of association with this government, you have become nothing but a tool of a new bout of repression.
They can say whatever they want. I am in public service. I understand that I'm subject to criticism. But I know that we are on the right side of history, and when the final chapter is written, it will be clear that who was doing what, who stood for the cause of justice and rule of law. The TPLF wants to continue with its impunity. It wants to ensure that it will have undue influence, and towards that end, they are trying to destabilize the country, and we cannot let that
You can pile the blame on the TPLF for all of the different problems that Ethiopia faces today and the many different regions where many of your people seem so desperately unhappy with the government right now. But I am mindful that it is just a year since Abiy Ahmed was given the Nobel Peace Prize. How much has changed in just 1 year to the point where the International Crisis Group, a respected independent group of international analysts, are saying that the damaging conflict we now see in Ethiopia risks ripping the state asunder? Do you agree with that?
As I have pointed out earlier, if this kind of situation has happened in any country, if an army base was attacked in Scotland or Wales, the commander-in-chief, the head of government, would have to respond to that. Just because the prime minister has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, it doesn't mean that he stops being a commander-in-chief. He has a constitutional duty to protect the political and territorial integrity of the nation. He has to ensure that the troops are protected and they are not slaughtered like lamb.
But my question, Mr. Attorney General, is whether just 1 year after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Abiy Ahmed risks overseeing an Ethiopia which is sinking into civil war.
If the Prime Minister was to let the TPLF go on with the kind of things that they have been doing, if he had let them acquire the heavy weaponry they wanted to acquire by attacking the Northern Command, yes, we would have descended into that kind of situation. But by taking the measure we are taking right now, we will be able to avert that possibility. The Prime Minister, being a man who wants to resolve things peacefully, has done everything possible, everything conceivable in the last 2.5 years to resolve differences with the TPLF in a peaceful manner. Until the TPLF attacked the Northern Command, just 2 days before the attack, the Prime Minister was in contact with the chairperson of the TPLF. Even prior to that, there were many formal and informal efforts to ensure that the TPLF will come to the table.
How real is the risk of civil war?
As you have noted earlier, we are in the final phase of this operation, which means that we expect that rather quickly we'll be able to finalize our campaign and we'll be able to rebuild Tigray, we'll be able to resettle those who have been displaced and to heal the wound that has been afflicted on the nation.
Gedion, Timothewos, I think